Hello and welcome to Read Scholars Live. I'm your host, Dr. Mary Fleming, and current president of Read Scholars. Today, I am joined by Kimberly Novod, who is an educator, advocate, doula, and the founder of Saul's Light Foundation, which provides support and comfort to those families with infants in the NICU and to those who have experienced an infant loss. So hi, Kimberly, welcome.
Hi, thank you for having me, Dr. Fleming.
Thank you for joining us. I'm super excited to learn a little bit about Saul's Light Foundation and the motivation behind starting the foundation. So I figure we jump right in and kind of start there.
Okay, let's jump in. Saul's Light was founded in 2015. It was a year after my son Saul passed away. He was born prematurely and experienced the highest grade brain bleed that infants can have, and it's something that's typically associated with premature birth.
Mhm.
And most brain bleeds resolve on their own, but unfortunately his didn't. And in fact it just it got worse. And when he passed away in 2014. I started the organization in 2015. It was a result of recognizing in my community in New Orleans that there was a void when it came to support services for families that had, number one, endured the NICU, and two, endured infant loss, right? And infant loss that's associated with the NICU.
Right.
I feel like for such a universal experience, and by universal, I mean that it happens a lot more than people think it does.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people have this experience in common, but we've normalized it, right? We've normalized kind of having premature babies and normalized them going to the NICU as just a part of the birth story. So anyway, for a universal experience such as this, I just found it odd that people weren't talking about it, and two, that there weren't dedicated support services for families going through these experiences, especially because so many of us are going through it. As you know, New Orleans, Louisiana, and the southern region specifically has high rates of premature birth and high rates of infant mortality. And so, for this to be happening in the numbers that it's happening, I just felt that there has to be more.
Right.
And then when there wasn't, then I had this kind of idea, but I call it an idea, but it was more than that, right? It was something that I definitely felt was bigger than me.
Mm-hmm.
And it became obvious to me that, like, okay, this is the next step. This is how you can make meaning out of this situation. This is how you can create a legacy for your son. This is how you can create a path to healing. And most of all, this is how you can give back to your community.
And so for our listeners, so we've talked about maternal mortality a few times on the podcast so far, and maternal health issues and maternal health disparities broadly.
Mm-hmm.
We probably haven't talked so much about infant mortality yet. So that's a little bit of a new topic. So we'll kind of catch people up. But just to make sure everybody who's listening is on the same page. So we've said NICU several times, both of us. So NICU stands for Neonatal Intensive Care Unit. So most people have heard of the ICU for adults. So when babies are born earlier with complications and need extra support and care, they often go to the Neonatal Intensive Care Unit. And they may stay there for a day, right? Or they may stay there for weeks or months, depending on what their challenges are and what their, how prematurely they were born and what type of social support services that they need in addition to the clinical support services. So this is it can be a very complicated process. The other part that I want to touch on that you said was around support around fetal loss in general and neonatal loss in general. So from OBGYN perspective, from a clinician's perspective, we are often at a loss as well, because we know that our patients, our pregnant moms, our recently delivered moms often need support outside of the 2 days that they're with us in the hospital,
Right.
or the few minutes that they're with us in the office. And, we have to tell them that they've had a loss. And to your point, there's often not those community wraparound services to say, hey, go here, or maybe we can find you a therapist or a counselor, but not necessarily somebody who's trained in neonatal loss or fetal loss, which is it's a very challenging loss. And I even tell our moms who lose pregnancies in the first trimester, I mean, that's still a grieving process that needs to be supported. And we don't have the best services for that. So I appreciate you recognizing there was a void, and not just recognizing there was a void, but saying, let's do something about it, because that type of initiative is not always present, and especially when you're going through a grief process yourself. So thank you so much for recognizing it, and then doing something about it. And so I thought maybe we spend a little bit of time, just because this is a unique point in the process of going in the NICU and experiencing, like you said, and it's something that happens more often than it should. And we know it's something that happens more often, especially in Black women in this country. It is a very recognizable health disparity that we are not doing well and changing. But for that experience, can you share, just from being a mom with a son in the NICU, just tell us about what that was like, how interacting with the physicians and nurses and other providers in the NICU setting was for you, and any specific challenges to the clinical part, and then we'll go over to the advocacy and policy part.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you for lifting up that initiative, and I, can't forget to mention or to say that to be able to do it, to be able to have an organization that does this is a great privilege. And it's something that I think we can explore later too, just how being able to actively grieve and to be able to heal in such a way is a privilege. But should be one that everybody is afforded.
Right.
So I can't forget that. But when I think back to being in the NICU with my son, I think probably the first thing that stands out for me, and most NICU moms will agree, right, is just the shock that it's happening. You can't believe you're there. You can't believe that you're going through this. When you decide to, plan for the birth of a baby, or you conceptualize having a baby, you never fathom that the NICU is going to be a part of it. And so when you go to the NICU, it is really like being dropped off into another planet, right? Everything is foreign. There are a lot of people there. There are doctors, there are nurses, there are therapists, there are, respiratory therapists, occupational therapists, all of these things. And there's a brand new set of language and vocabulary that you're not used to. So even the most learned person, even, the person who may be highly educated, might not understand the things that are happening in the NICU. It might as well be, Russian or some whatever other language you don't know. And so, I think the first thing for me is it was shocking. And so really having to confront everything that I believed, right? So you think like you have all this time to go through this kind of like existential crisis, but you don't. It happens instantly. And you begin to question yourself. How did we get here? What did I do wrong? How did I let this happen? How has my body failed me? What can I do to make this better? Or what can I do to protect your child? Because that's part of being a mother. That's part of being a parent, is you get this kind of need or desire in you to protect your baby at all costs, right? And so what you have to confront when you go to the NICU is that it's out of your hands, and that no matter what that feeling is that is inside of you, this innate feeling to protect, you really can't do that, right? And you don't even know if you're allowed to. So another thing that is very shocking and very like heartbreaking is depending on, you know, why your baby is there. Let's say you have a very premature baby, you have to ask if you can touch your baby. You have to ask what is allowed, what is okay. And that's just not something that, you know, when you have a healthy baby, you don't think about, right? When you give birth to a baby, the very first thing that you want to do with that baby is hold it. And that's not the case in the NICU. Some people don't hold their babies for weeks or months after they're born, depending on the situation. And then, you know, you don't know what to do, right? And then your baby's health becomes a priority, because again, that's part of being a parent. But then you also have to be mindful of your own physical healing, and that you're in the postpartum period and you can't forget yourself, right? But that's another thing that parents do, and that mothers do, right? We just think baby first. And so I think that part of the challenge of being in the NICU is that all of these things are kind of colliding. You know, how you take care of yourself and what you do for yourself is at the very bottom, when really it should actually be at the top. Because you have to take care of yourself and be well in order to be there for your baby, in order to be present for your baby. And so, you know, we'll see moms who maybe have had an emergency C-section, and they're already sitting up in the NICU looking at their baby because they're so worried about their baby, when really, you know, they probably should still be, you know, in the bed kind of taking it easy. But when your mind and your heart is divided, you know, typically your health and what's best for you comes last. And so I think that was certainly the situation for me when I had my son, and when he was transferred from the hospital that he was born in to a higher level NICU hospital. I signed myself out of the hospital against my doctor's orders, right? Because they were like, you need to recover. This, you know, this is not good. I don't think you should go. But I couldn't even consider my own self. I just thought, they're taking my baby on a helicopter across the city, and I've got to be there.
I gotta go too. Yeah.
And I gotta go. You know, so I think that's probably the hard thing. The hardest is that the shock, right? Like, what is happening? It all feels so foreign. You feel so powerless. You feel that you're not a parent, that you're kind of a bystander and you're watching. And there's so much to learn. And then on top of all of that, you know, the thing that is probably most disturbing is like living on the edge, but constantly.
Right.
So, you know, with my son in particular, and, you know, probably all, you know, premature babies, certainly in NICU babies, is you're living moment to moment, and you're alert and you're on guard for anything that should happen, but for every day, all night, for weeks or months at a time, right? And this is why most people who go through the NICU experience PTSD, because the level of alertness that's required, right? And the constant beeping of the machines, and the test and the reports and the ups and downs, the roller coaster, it affects you. And it certainly affected me. I was a person that was diagnosed with PTSD, and 6 years later, it's still something that I have to, you know, work hard on my overall wellness and mental health to make sure that I am taking care of myself and honoring, what's best and what's well for me.
Exactly. And that, I mean, I think you underlined and underscored a few different things. One, um, thinking about just the overwhelming amount of information and stimulation that comes with being in the NICU, right? So the number of people, the number of noises, the number of decisions you have to make, the amount of
Mm-hmm.
control that you have to give up, and trying to negotiate that care, self care versus the care for your new child. And so I think that is definitely, a reason why this is a vulnerable place for many people. And we appreciate you being very vulnerable with your story with us today. And I think the other part of, we talk about the disparity in outcomes. So, that this often happens in certain communities more than others. But
Mm-hmm.
to your next point, then we have to negotiate the disparity in resources, right? So you talk about your
Yes.
baby has to get transferred out. Sometimes for some women, if you're in a major city, that's just across town. For our ladies
Right.
who are in rural populations, that might be 2 hours away. And then
Mm-hmm.
trying to figure out how you're going to get to see your baby. For ladies who might have financial limitations, thinking about transportation, going back to work for long NICU stays, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if you have, depending on what your insurance coverage, there's lots of things that then on top of the clinical challenges that you might
Yeah.
have some resource issues. So it's definitely a place where we need advocacy and support. So kind of switching back over to the work of the foundation, share with us a little bit about, what maybe a typical day with you is, or a typical interaction with someone who you may advocate for, so people kind of know,
Mm-hmm.
one, what you do, how they could potentially be involved, how they could maybe broaden this to their community, and that type of thing.
Yeah. So the our biggest, form of support, or our mission, is addressing those very things that you mentioned, right? If if everything is right, if
Mhm.
all of the moving pieces are accounted for during a NICU stay, then maybe you'll come out unscathed. But that's not the typical experience. Just because, right, the way that our country is set up, the way that, surely our local community is set up, is that the financial issues, barriers, and challenges to being present and being active in your baby's care are huge for a lot of NICU families. Um, I would say the biggest form of support that we work with families is to provide transportation. And because lots of parents are coming from rural parishes and their babies are, on the helicopter to the main hospital that's in New Orleans proper, but they're 5 hours away or 6 hours away. And so, right, then the question becomes, how do I get there? Maybe they can't take time off of work. um, Maybe, if they take that time off of work, they won't have a job to go back to.
Right.
And then if they do that, what about groceries?
Hmm.
Or cars don't run on their own, what about gas? And if there's no car, what about the bus, or what about the train? Or, right, all these different things that, if you are if you have a lower income, can make a stressful situation 100 times more stressful, because you can't get to the hospital, right? And we know that, um, you know parents who are present and involved in their babies' care, their babies have better outcomes, right? Because babies need the bonding, they need kangaroo care, they need to
Right.
be talked to be sung to. They need their parents to ask questions, they need their moms to pump if she's interested
Hmm.
in doing that. And so our work is really about trying to eliminate barriers and making sure that, as much as possible, people are on an even playing field,
Right.
when it comes to being a NICU parent, right? So we believe that all people should be able to be present and active in their baby's care, not just the ones that can afford it. It's not fair to the babies, it's not fair to the parents, it's not fair to our communities.
Right.
So for us, support looks like financial assistance. That's the biggest thing, for things like transportation, lodging, meals, and also emergency bill payment assistance, right?
Mm,
Because one thing that NICU families can tell you is this: life doesn't stop
right.
just because your baby is in the NICU or just because your child died.
Mm,
The utility companies still want their money, the rent people, the mortgage, all of these things, right? You still have to be present in all parts of your life when it really feels like your world has stopped.
right.
And so typically, we work with hospital partnerships where we set up funds so that families that are within these hospital partnerships can
Mm,
access those funds.
okay.
And then for hospitals that we don't have relationships with, we work by referral basis. So what that means is that really anybody in the state can request relief or request,
Mm,
various methods of support. And in our community, in our state, we don't turn any family down, because we know what it takes to be able to ask for help. Right? That's not easy.
mhm,
And so we understand that um, parents are asking because they need and because they want to be there for their babies and they want to be the best parents that they can be. And we want to make sure that they have the opportunity to do that. And so when we hear from families, we assess their needs, to see what their biggest barrier is to getting there, right? Do they have money for gas? Or is it that they're from 4 or 5 hours away, and so now they need a bus ticket to come to New Orleans? Um, and then once they get to New Orleans, do they have a place to
First
stay?
thing, yeah.
Right? And are is there food in the house for their other kids? Can they keep the lights on? Things like that. When they're in the NICU, um, do they have books, for example? So we have a little library initiative that
Mhm,
gives families books to share with their children. And so our books are multicultural and multilingual because we know representation matters. And the goal of that program is to promote bonding, to promote cognitive development,
mm,
and to promote early literacy, because this is also very crucial for our babies. Is that they have a positive start in life, and so they get to keep their books, and the hope is that they'll continue to read when they're discharged, and that they'll start their own little library at home. We also offer peer support. And so, what that looks like is matching families who have similar experiences
mm,
to kind of walk through the journey with them. Um, and so, it's not to give medical advice, but it's just to show someone, for example, I'm 2 years out from this, or I'm 10 years out from this, and here's what it looks like. Here are resources in the community that you might need, such as early steps, or such as Healthy Start, or WIC, or whatever other resources that we can point them to. Um, Really, the whole point is to show parents and families that when they experience traumatic birth outcomes, right, whether it's a NICU stay or whether it's the loss of a child, we want them to know that they're not alone. We want them to know that there are people there to help them. There are services, there are resources in the community. And if they don't know what they are, we'll show them what they are. If they don't know what they're entitled to, we'll make sure that they do. Um, because all of us are so connected, right? And we understand that when when you have to get back to real life, you can't show up broken, or you can't show up, you know partially, right? And so you need really kind of this enveloping embrace that says, here are the therapists in our community that we trust. Here are the people that will be sensitive with you and with your experience and your stories. And if you can't afford that, then we'll make sure that you're able to um, have that, to go to the therapist, to take part in this support group, to take part in yoga workshops. We know that people have to get back to their relationships. They have to get back to their jobs. They have to get back to their children and to their
Mhm.
community. And so we want them to show up whole, and we want them to show up well.
Right.
And so any way that we can do that, we do. And so if that means finding out which hotel is closest to the hospital and booking a stay for a week or 2 weeks, then we'll do that. If it's making sure that you have preemie sized diapers to take your baby home,
Right.
right? Or a car seat, because they won't let your baby out of the NICU if they don't
Right.
pass a car seat test, right?
Right.
And you need a car seat.
Yeah. That fits
So
your baby.
right, exactly, right. So those things will help them to do. That's what it's really about.
Yeah.
It is really about paying it forward, because when my family was going through that period of uncertainty and ultimately darkness and healing, there were people that helped us along the way.
Right.
We didn't do it on our own. I most certainly didn't do it on my own. When my son died, I fell down a rabbit hole of grief, and it took a lot to come out of it. It took resources, it took people, it took therapy, it took drugs, it took pharmaceutical drugs. It's
Yes, yes, yes.
support groups, mindfulness, yoga. It took all these things. And what it made me realize is that everybody deserves that.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody deserves that. This should not be, can you afford to help yourself, to make yourself well? Can you afford to address grief? And can you afford to address PTSD? That is not how it should be.
Right.
And I feel that conviction wholly and 100%. And I love New Orleans. I love my city. And so I love my community. And I think that, any way that I can do that, any way that we can put together an army of people that can do that, that are dedicated to maternal child health, to, try to change the tide on some of these statistics that are affecting
Right.
our community. And doubly so, for Black women and Black babies, then that's a community I want to be in coalition with, because we're all in this together.
Right. I think, well, two things. We won't go into this today because that would be a whole nother podcast. But I think we should be mindful when we talk about all these issues in the context of a pandemic that we're in now. These are only amplified, right? So when we talk about
Yes.
going to visit the
Oh my
NICU
God.
with restrictions around visitors, we just talk about worried about NICU, not NICU, no, worried about COVID infections and how that affects babies. And that's a whole nother thing. But also just the limited amount of access to resources during a pandemic, and transportation. All of these things are just a challenge, right? Employment's a challenge. Transportation is a challenge. Financial resources are a challenge. Visiting the hospital are a challenge. So all of these things we've talked about are just amplified right now, and re-highlighting the differences and disparities in different populations, again, depending on what resources they have access to. And the second thing I wanted to go back and just, again, underscore that you just said was talking about grief and how that is managed through this process, and making sure you're taking time for yourself and understanding what that means in real time, having appropriate resources for mental health support in the community, which is not often available, and it's limited. Again, if you're getting on a bus from 5 hours away, trying to make sure you also have to figure out where you're going to get a therapist, how are you going to see the therapist in this time. And one thing that I often recognize with our ladies who you don't have personal transportation, using a shared transportation or public transportation makes everything harder, right? Because you have to allot for so much more time in your day. And even when you think about just coming for a regular doctor's appointment, that might be a 4-hour interchange by the time you have to get there early because the bus is going to pick you up 2 hours early. You're going to have to wait an
Yes.
hour afterwards, get back home. You might have to stop and drop off some more people on the way. And so those are just, introduce another set of challenges to something that's
Right.
already challenging.
And that's with reliable
Right,
transportation, right?
right.
What if you live in a city that does not have this kind of
Like,
mass
may come today,
transportation,
may not.
right?
We'll see.
Right. There is no subway in New Orleans, so
Right.
oh gosh,
Yeah.
yeah,
So
it's a lot.
it's just so much. And so I think of course we can probably do another episode and keep talking about these things.
Yeah.
Um, but I just wanted to kind of underscore a couple of those things. And I think especially with the holidays coming up, and there's always been such a child friendly time of year, imagining what
Hmm.
some of our families are going through when you're revisiting, like you talked about PTSD, when you're revisiting that loss over and over again, that can be really challenging. So I'm glad that you brought that up and encourage people to seek help and support. And
Hmm.
it doesn't have to be always, like you said, it doesn't always have to be professional help. Find your
Hmm.
community, rely on your family and friends, rely on
Yes.
groups like yours that, will provide that support if you don't have that built into your community. So I encourage people who are listening, who may be going through this or know somebody who is, to look for your Saul's Light Foundation,
Hmm.
locally, or if you're in New Orleans, right there at home.
Yep.
So,
Yep.
uh,
And we are part of a network. So if anybody wants to contact me, I will definitely be able to help you find an organization that serves your community.
like it. Well, as we close, I usually like to close on an upbeat. So tell
Yeah.
us what you are looking forward, either personally or professionally, as we go into
Yeah.
2021.
Yeah. So I'm looking forward to honestly spending these last few weeks of the year with my family, um, in reflection and in gratitude, because I think that there are all these kind of jokes and memes and things about how like 2020 has been the worst year,
Yeah.
right? It's been very challenging. I agree with that. Um, but I think that there are always um, opportunities for gratitude. I think that there are a lot of things that we can be grateful for, and something that I'm grateful for is to be able to do what I'm doing. Um, I love it. It's my heart's work. It's my purpose, and I didn't know it would be this.
Yeah.
I would have absolutely preferred it not be this. It was
Yes.
it
Yeah.
was a hard lesson.
Yeah.
Um, but it's an honor and a privilege to be able to walk with people through their journeys, and the fact that they share with me and they let me in, that means a lot to me. And so I'm a mom again. I have a 3-year-old, and so just to be present with her and to see the goodness in life through her eyes, right, helps me to stay mindful, helps me to stay grateful. And so I'm looking forward to continuing to do this work. I'm looking forward to reach new levels of growth, personal growth, and as always meeting new people, because I think that we learn from each other, and everybody has something special about them. Everybody has some journey,
Right.
um, that we can learn from and that we can become better people from, right? Just being in community with those people. And so I think you're one of those people. So, I'm glad that we've had this opportunity to talk and to share, and hopefully somebody receives something positive from what we're doing here today.
Thank you. I think that was a perfect way to end. Thank you again so much for taking the time to be on Read Scholars Live. And of course, we look forward to seeing what you do next. And we wish you well and happy holidays. And hopefully, we'll talk again soon.
Yeah, thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you for listening to Read Scholars Live. Please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, or subscribe to our YouTube channel.